Okay, hey, Cosmic Zen, this is to answer your question about, well, what do I accept about objective reality? The thing is, yes, I do have a model of the so-called objective world. So put loosely, I mean, the issue here is that objectivists explain their perceptions in terms of physical objects. Skeptics explain physical objects in terms of their perceptions, okay? And I believe one of those is in the right order and one of those is in the wrong order. You don't want to explain something you do understand in terms of something that you have no access to, the so-called external world. So you want to have a theory of this subjective perceptive reality first, okay? And so this is why the first argument is about, well, are the elements of reason themselves self-evident truths? Because if they are, you see, then we can say we're not really getting all of our knowledge from perceptions, okay? But we are getting all of our knowledge from perceptions. I don't believe logic because, it's self-evident, and reality be damned. If reality doesn't adhere to logic, then reality must be rejected. No. If the principles of logic don't apply to reality, then they are the ones that have to be rejected. And there's many cases of this where, logical system doesn't exactly fit. The law of the excluded middle works great in first order logic, but it doesn't actually apply to every statement that can be made. Because there's lots of terms that are not so well defined that sentences using those terms actually in reality do comply with the law of non-contradiction. Now you can make these things all work out again, but while they're not working out, reality trumps, and so-called self-evident truths can't trump. All truths have to be compared to reality. So I do have a model of objective reality. I'm a materialist. It's just that I define these things in a particular order. And there's thousands of years here, and we can have people come and try to redefine all the terms a certain way and have a system that works. And that could be functionally equivalent to skepticism. I mean, look at the way Beethoven's Seventh, if you've seen any of his comments, and he says all these objective and absolute truths rely on context, which makes that system relativistic, because relativism is really, it's not saying there's no facts, it's saying facts are true relative to a context. And furthermore, all these terms have multiple definitions. You look in a dictionary, it's the same thing in a philosophy dictionary. There's more than one sense or understanding of a particular term. And, it's difficult arguing with objectivists sometimes because they think that, Rand's definitions are the definition, or they're the type of people that think there is one correct definition. They don't realize that, no, what we're doing is we're creating definitions that work with each other, and we're seeing how these systems work, and then we compare that whole system to another system. They expect that we should be able to have a one-to-one correspondence between our ideas and models and reality. That's what they mean if they say that the law of cause and effect is an absolute. They're saying that there is no other way to think about, whatever this phenomena is. We look at systems like, or metaphors from, analogous situations, like in describing space. You can describe space with the Cartesian system or coordinates, or you can describe it with radial coordinates. Now, some people want to say, well, see, they're actually the same thing, but they're not. The equation for a circle in radial coordinates is r equals 5. The equation in Cartesian coordinates is what? X squared plus y squared equals 5. Or 25, I guess. So, they're obviously different systems, and some shapes are complicated to describe in one system that are simple in the other system. Yeah, you can map back and forth from one to the other, but this is my point, that the phenomena is out there. And these models, you can actually have two totally valid models that are very distinct from one another. And since they're both valid on the same metaphor, you can even translate one to the other. That doesn't make those two systems exactly the same. Because the point is, there's a phenomena of space out there. And some people would want to say, well, so space is the absolute. But no, the point is that every conception of space that you're going to have is just going to be one conception. And there's always some other conception that can describe that space. But there's other metaphors, I think, that are better to show how there's big decisions. In the case of the coordinate systems, it's what's going to be simple to explain what's going to be more complex. But there's also things like, in the ancient times where they wanted to have, non-whole numbers be described with ratios. Well, with ratios, there's numbers that you can't actually express, even in rational numbers. 1/3 in decimal notation is 0.33333 for infinity. You can't actually write down 1/3 using decimal notation. So there's a hole in decimal notation where there's a number that we recognize as an actual, real, rational number, and yet we cannot portray it in that system. That can be no big deal, or it can become a big deal. I mean, we have this in computers as a very big issue with numerical processing, that it uses binary. So there's certain numbers that we are used to having finite digits that cannot be represented with a finite number of digits in binary. And this does become a problem, and it introduces error into our calculations when we look and work with the decimal notation. So you choose a model based on the criterion of what you want to be simple, where you don't want the holes to be, and so on. And the phenomenon remains the same, but our models, are various. Now, as I said, I am a materialist, so just to answer your question, I don't like to call it objective reality, because even though there's a concept of object in it, there's a history to that term. And what we're really saying is that there is a world out there, there's a material world of some sort, and it's whatever is producing these consistent perceptions that I get from my so-called sense perceptions. It does have objects in it, but should we really call it objective? I mean, look, objects are supposed to be particle-like. When we look in material, touchable things, not energy. When we look, we see things that are more wave-like and things that break down into energy, that everything's energy. And that's not really particle-like. So, the objects in this material reality are not really, like objects is in the sense that we inherited this ancient idea of what an object should be. So why call it objective? I want to make sure that we get things right. And first we have a perceptive reality, and that's what we build, a theory of objective reality. We call objective reality like contrary to subjective. Well, it turns out that what we actually do is we take subjective bits and we build a theory of objective morality. And I don't want to say that's not subjective anymore. It's like, let's say you have a culture that's always built churches of brick, and I built a church of glass. By some definitions, people say, well, that's not really a church. You didn't really build a church. And I'm saying, well, it serves the same purpose as a church. It's functionally equivalent to a church. If you define a church as a place to worship or something like that, then it could be considered a church. If it really has to be brick, then fine, no, it's not church. But one thing I'm not going to do is build this building out of glass, and then since I'm calling it a church, say, so therefore it's made of brick. I'm not going to say, here, look, I've built this objective model out of subjective bricks, and then once I make that model, suddenly they become absolutely certain and objective in that sense. No. I have a theory about the objective reality that I built out of subjective parts, and I'm trying to stay true to that criteria. And it's important, because if you think you have an absolutely sure model of objective reality, you don't have to change it. But we have to change ours. We keep having to augment and adapt our concept of what the objective world is like to new facts. And what are these facts? These facts are perceptions, new perceptions. So I just want to get things in that order. And as I've said a million times, none of these concepts that I agree with these people that these concepts are broken or insufficient. I'm not saying throw everything out. I'm not saying throw out everything we think we know. I'm saying keep what we know and improve it to take into account what we now have known subsequent to coming up with that theory. Theory of cause and effect needs updating based on new information. It doesn't mean it goes away. It means we need to break it down. And maybe our idea of cause and effect isn't what we're going to preserve as is. We're going to have to break down and say, well, really, the idea of cause and effect is talking about a continuity between one set of phenomena and another set of phenomena. We're not going to lose it and suddenly there's no reason and this is the point about with Bohr, is that they're criticizing Bohr like no knowledge and you can't investigate nature, but Bohr himself investigated nature, and very successfully so. His theories were very successful in the predictive sense. His mathematical models, very successful. So how could you sit there and say that this guy has no way left to investigate reality? Instead, you should be saying, wait a second, here's a guy that's seen and more or less proved that our traditional idea of cause and effect is insufficient, yet he still investigates reality. The question is, how? What is his attitude about nature that he thinks it can still be investigated when he's robbed me of the concepts that I use to motivate my investigation? And so we do have a material reality. We know it only through subjective means. And the real part of the debate that's going to get me stuck with people like Ayn Rand is this element of these self-evident truths, a priori truths. None of that do I believe. It all comes from experience one way or another.